Good afternoon and welcome to our LinkedIn Live discussion today, where we will be sharing practical blockchain use cases in healthcare and telecom. Today, we'll provide the blockchain basics, and then we'll seek to demonstrate just two use cases to see this technology in a practical application in healthcare and telecom. I'm Jeff Quinn, and I lead the technology, telecom, and media practice at the Northridge Group. We help our clients assess and optimize business processes, implement data analytics and visualization platforms to drive operational decisions and drive costs out of their businesses. I'm pleased to be joined today with three of my trusted colleagues who are also passionate about optimizing client processes and costs by leveraging data analytics and technology. First, I'd like to introduce Tom Reid, who's an executive advisor at the Northridge Group. We're also joined by Scott Johnson, president at Sage Management, and Deric Vinyard, managing vice president at Synchronoss Technologies. Welcome to the discussion, Tom, Scott, and Deric.
Thanks a lot, Jeff.
To set expectations today, listen, if you're in IT and you're looking for concepts on how to architect a blockchain solution or which platform is right for your current initiative, be it Hyperledger, Ethereum, or a host of other options, we can help. But you won't get that kind of detail from this call discussion. This discussion is intended for business leaders who hear the drum of blockchain coming from many directions, but need to conceptualize what it is and what it can do for them. In short, why do I care? Please note, by the way, we encourage you to utilize the comment feature in the LinkedIn Live as a chat to post your questions. We'll be responding to all the questions in writing after the session, and we'll post the completed Q&A document within a day or so on the event page. So we'll get started. You can see here up on this slide just sort of the basics. So blockchain is a technology that sits atop a broader technical solution known as distributed ledger technology, or DLT. Distributed in that it is typically on more than one server, where those servers carry identical information and can be accessed by the relevant parties. And a ledger in that it should be an official record of activities and events between two or more parties. Blockchain technology operates on the DLT to secure the records. Blockchain technology allows blocks or data records to be appended in a chain in a manner that allows the records to be shared, but also fully secure and virtually incorruptible. We also use terms to define these blocks in the chain as immutable and durable, which then allows the chain of blocks to become a shared single source of truth for the records in the blockchain deployment. For many, blockchain seems as though it came from nowhere to suddenly dominate business transformation discussions in all sorts of industries. But the sense of it coming out of nowhere is based in part on the manner in which blockchain technology was initially made known to most people, which was via cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. In this chart, we're obviously talking about enterprise IT. What we're depicting is that if you were to follow the arc of data and security over the past, say, 4 decades, you can see how we arrived at blockchain secured DLT use cases. Just on this slide for a moment, let's consider data storage along the bottom of the chart. There's been an evolution based on computing power, pervasiveness of internet connectivity, and use case applications whereby data storage has progressed to the point where many of the largest enterprises have migrated their most critical business data to cloud-based servers. That was a crazy notion as few as 10 or 15 years ago. In time, the way data has been stored went from plain text to encrypted, and now blockchain represents an even more secure application for data assurance when applied in a DLT environment. Looking at it from one other perspective on the left-hand side, user security has evolved also to the point where a fully evolved user credentialization will comprise likely both of two-factor authentication as well as biometrics. Some people, of course, are utilizing those today, but that's a really good place. And what you can see is between the blockchain DLT environment and the security that comes with it and a good user credentializations, you can attain the prize of secure data available anywhere, which is the inherent benefits of improving the velocity and efficiency of business processes. Tom, do you want to take it from here?
Absolutely. Thanks, Jeff. As he mentioned, what we're not talking about are cryptocurrencies. That's where most people have heard about blockchain so far, but we're talking about enterprise use cases. And you can really date back to old traditional paper ledgers in terms of understanding the concept of a distributed ledger technology. The difference here is that multiple parties sign every ledger entry. So whoever is party to that transaction, both of them sign that. It's, as Jeff said, indelible. So you can go back later to verify what the two parties or multiple parties agreed to. In creating a block, use an example of an order for a circuit in the telecommunications industry. So we have party A that sends an order across. It becomes kind of a draft block. They use technology called hash to kind of create a fingerprint for that order so that you can later see that what's in the order was what was originally in the order. And then they also digitally sign that order. So then on the other side, party B will review the order, review the fingerprint to make sure that nothing has changed, and then themselves sign that order. At that point, we have a block. And either party can go back to that block at any time to verify the contents of that block, and thus basically the agreement that the two parties made about that order. There are many flavors of blockchain. First, it really is a logical evolution, as Jeff was talking about in that chart, that these hash functions that I was just talking about, that's been around for a long time to be able to verify that the contents of a file has not been changed. And blockchain builds upon that. Asymmetric encryption has also been around for a long time, also called public-private key encryption, used for a lot of purposes, but also really essential in the blockchain. So you can use asymmetric encryption for digital signatures. You can also use it for encryption. And when you encrypt it, it's clear that you're the one who encrypted that file. Access policy is another key issue as we look at distributed ledger. There are public chains that are anonymous, like the cryptocurrency chains. Again, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about private permission chains, meaning you don't get to participate or see any of the blocks unless someone's given you permission to join this network of distributed ledger. Then there's also methods of consensus. And again, when we look at cryptocurrencies, most of them are proof of work. These are computationally very intensive, using electricity to the extent of many small countries right now in some of the cryptocurrency efforts. And transaction volume is exceptionally low. To try to improve things, people modified that to do proof of stake. It is less intensive computationally and somewhat improves the transaction volume. But the real breakthrough in use in enterprise is to use Byzantine fault tolerance. What that does is basically lets the parties approve a block. You propose a block, it gets approved by how many of our parties are in that network of distributed ledger, can handle very high transaction volumes. One of the examples of this that is quite popular is Hyperledger Fabric. So when we talk about use cases, one of my favorites for blockchain is the healthcare industry. The healthcare industry, in terms of who you interact with as a patient, you end up talking to a lot of different entities that are using different software packages. You got the payers and the billers, and then you have health information exchanges that try to glue all that together. But what we've got is really silos of data and then an intense web of interaction trying to pass some or all of that data back and forth amongst the multiple parties. This is just terribly prone to problems. Fixing an error in a record is very difficult because you don't know all the places that record went. And maintaining privacy is also very difficult. So the healthcare industry for a number of years has talked about we need to organize around the patient, but we need to organize the data around the patient as well. One way that can be done is intellectual property that my company developed called Seed Protocol. We've got several patents with it. It uses a lot of these approaches. So patient has a key created maybe by their primary care physician. That primary care physician can now encrypt data and put it in cloud storage. That primary care physician can also build out the care team with both deposit and retrieve privileges. Deposit only sort of services to things like trackers and labs. The lab doesn't need to read the data back, it just needs to deposit data. Payers need data, but they don't need all the data, just the claims-oriented data. And then researchers, we want them to be able to get the data too. As patients, we all want that, but we want our identity masked to protect our privacy. And then the ultimate of this is to give the patient control over that data so that they can have both access and consent of that data. Then we can also generate blocks for specific milestones, prescription, a referral to a specialist, patient consent, and so forth. So you see it's got all of the various aspects that we talked about with hash and digital signatures and block formation. So that would give us this single source of truth, one authoritative source for the data about that patient. Now, the healthcare industry is difficult though. There's a lot of built-in interests with the healthcare providers not really wanting patient data to be that portable, electronic health record companies not really wanting to be that data to be all that portable. So it's a more difficult use case than the telecom industry. Scott?
Actually, I think I'm taking this one,
Deric,
Tom, but
sorry.
I appreciate the handoff and interesting perspective on the healthcare industry. And as you said, let's talk about something that we really firmly believe is a near-term practical use case, which is in telecom. So looking at the telecom industry, what are some of the drivers to utilize blockchain as a very practical solution? First of all, complexity and change drive billing errors in telecom. As many of us on this session are aware, the merger and consolidation in the telecom industry over the past 15 to 20 years has been pretty rapid and massive over time. And when you have those companies coming together, bringing billing systems together, introducing new products, it is facilitating errors to the consumer, to the enterprise, to wholesale partners. So really that complexity and change is point number one. Point number two, really as a offshoot of that, is with the concentration carriers and the B2B nature of enterprise telecom expense management, or TEM, it's really conducive to using the smart contract concept in blockchain for the purchase of MPLS, Ethernet, SD-WAN, dark fiber, and other facility-based charges. And we'll get into a little bit more why that's the case over the next few slides. And then the final point here in terms of the drivers, really, enterprises over time to manage the complexity, to manage the billing errors, have purchased these TEM applications to manage expense, accruals from an accounting perspective. The employ auditors or analysts to validate the bills, and it can cause really wasted time and money of those resources that could be doing higher value tasks across the enterprise. So if you look at the overall market opportunity, 4 key things here. The big number is $651 billion. That's Gartner's worldwide IT spending forecast for communications, media, and services markets. 2% really is an average cost for the enterprise to manage their spend with a TEM application, so spend under management. $12 million is the key fact, really, per FTE. So an enterprise that has at least $12 million in annual telecom services spend typically equates to 1 FTE to help manage that. And then that really distills down to 50,000 resources estimated performing audit and spend management services in large enterprises worldwide. So, a lot of manpower behind managing this particular task. So really looking at those drivers and some of the stats, why telecom blockchain for large enterprises. Number one, we talked about the complexity and change that really lead to billing errors. Number two is the use of those non-traditional AP systems, almost like a pre-AP system for specialized spend with TEMS. Number three would be the staff to support invoice audit and dispute management and payment. We looked at the stat on the last page, 50,000 approximately worldwide focused just on that. Spend concentration is really, from our perspective, one of the key requisites. So if you have spend with relatively few carriers, it really can help with the ROI and the business case for blockchain. And then finally, emerging product concentration limited to several technologies. So if you're an enterprise who is purchasing some of those facility-based services, we mentioned SD-WAN, dark fiber, MPLS, we believe telecom blockchain can really have an impactful ROI for your business both on the buyer side, the enterprise side, and on the carrier side of the ledger as well. And with that, Scott Johnson will take us through some of these use case examples over the next couple of slides.
Yeah, thanks, Deric. Actually, Tom's probably going to get, after this slide, Tom will get into some of the specific infrastructure for blockchain as it applies to enterprise. Just to kind of dive down a little bit deeper into the vendor concentration that Deric mentioned, right, which is a critical kind of infrastructure, critical environment, the complexity and change. And we'll talk a little bit about complexity and change as it applies to the service. But from a vendor concentration standpoint, it's not just that for the services that Deric was mentioning, SD-WAN, Ethernet, and MPLS, that it's constant, that those technologies are there, but it's that it's with a few vendors. Think about setting up a blockchain for 100 vendors, and then think about setting up a blockchain for 3. But there's also a driver with those vendors. Those vendors are great at producing these new emerging technologies that you can go from an old network to a new network and apply AI on top of that new network and differentiate from an enterprise standpoint. They obviously need to get paid for those services, but they're not really interested from the billing standpoint. The billing standpoint is just as complex as the service delivery, but the billing standpoint is equally as complex, and they have to maintain it. So in addition to Deric's business case from an enterprise standpoint, from enterprise is going to reduce their expenses if you move to a blockchain infrastructure, those telecom vendors, the AT&Ts, the Verizons, the Lumens, they have a reduced, a reduced expense. They don't have to necessarily bill. They can put more emphasis on creating those emerging technologies. The complexity is driving the need for it. If the service was very simple, why would you need to, put everything in a blockchain if it's an easy transaction? But they're not easy. It's very difficult to actually put up a service from an Ethernet standpoint. You looked at special access moving into Ethernet. Those Ethernet services, while people thought that they would be kind of more simplistic in nature, they're not. It's just as complex, and if not more so, with some of the contracts and the different iterations. So you see the different architectures. The provisioning of these services is complex. The systems that are provisioning are different than the systems that are billing, right? So there's not swivel chair, but there's a loose integration between those two systems. So being able to reduce that expense, both on the service provider standpoint and on the enterprise standpoint, it's a big, huge win just for both parties. You can focus on emerging technology. From a change standpoint, we're in the middle of the 4th industrial revolution, right? Everybody is looking to get to the cloud, reduce their data centers, right? Even in the federal space, they have on the FITARA scorecard, how quickly can we reduce our data centers, right? And move to the cloud. So you see an enormous amount of change going from, the MPLS network. Now you're having Ethernet tails. People are looking at SD-WAN. Oh yeah, 5G is right around the corner, right? So it's the change isn't necessarily going to stop. So from that change standpoint, with the complexity and the concentration of vendors, it makes it a great use case for some of the information that Tom's going to provide from a technology standpoint with blockchain.
Thanks, Scott. So, if you look at enterprise and a carrier, everybody has their legacy applications that they deal with. So on both sides, I've got a lot of the similar tasks. And right now, there's just a tremendous amount of struggle comes out of it. The data's not well aligned. You can end up with a lot of errors. You end up with accruals and disputes. Takes a lot of time and kind of slows the velocity of money, which isn't good for either side. So in going to a blockchain world, well, we're not just going to immediately trade out all of those legacy applications, right? It's got a lot of infrastructure there we count on. So what we do is stand up a distributed ledger. And to do that, both parties have a smart contract node. So smart contracts kind of have a mystique about them. It's really just another server. And it's a server, generally it's going to be cloud-based, like Amazon has them, Azure. There's a lot of different people getting into the managed blockchain environments. So you're going to light up a server, And the big difference between a smart contract server and other servers is that they're running the exact same code. So you've either collaboratively developed this or somebody has developed it and has sold it as a product, but the two smart contract nodes are running identical software, frequently referred to as chain code. So you'd then interface, rather than trying to just replace all of those applications, you'd interface to those applications to the smart contract servers. And then now what that lets you do is now you can start capturing blocks, creating blocks. So for instance, you might create a block for the contract terms themselves. And then there's an order for a new circuit. There might be some changes to the order. When did you accept that the circuit was up and working? The accepted date's really important in terms of ETLs and things like that. And then you could even start doing invoicing or credit debit across the distributed ledger as well. And of course, any changes to the circuit that might affect the price. You take it from 100 meg to a gig. And so you capture that as well. So each of these key milestones then become a block, and there's not going to be any controversy about what that circuit's supposed to cost because you agreed to it up front before the circuit was even installed. You put your draft block in, they reviewed the block and either kicked it out and said, no, it's not what we agreed to, or they go ahead and sign it. And then, that's indelible again, so that you can go back anytime. And so you end up then with this single shared source of truth between at least two parties. We keep talking about two parties to try to simplify the conversation, but there can be any number of parties in this sort of environment. So longer term then, we've got those smart contract nodes, our legacy applications interface to them. Over time then, we can add other enterprises and other carriers, and we can add financial institutions as well. And you'll note here that we're showing party-specific chains. And that's a really important aspect of these permission blockchains, particularly with Hyperledger Fabric, is if you work with a carrier and you create a distributed ledger, there may be other carriers participating in that same distributed ledger, but your interactions with that particular carrier are in your own private chains. No one else can get to those. Those are party-specific chains. So if there's 3 parties to that, yeah, all 3 parties can see it, but nobody else can see it. So this is a really important aspect of making this enterprise capable, that you can go ahead and add all these other parties to your distributed ledger, and you still maintain all of that privacy of the business transactions themselves. So now we have multiple shared source of truth based on whoever the parties are of any given business transaction. And over time, as we depend more and more on those smart contract nodes and different user interfaces, we can start retiring some of those legacy applications. Some of them very old, difficult to maintain, and expensive. We can start moving away from those. So I'll pass it off to Scott again, right?
Yeah, that's right. Thanks a lot, Tom. So what next? How do you kind of prepare for this? So from our standpoint, even if you're not in a blockchain, moving around your processes a little bit, tinkering with your process a little bit, even if you never get to a blockchain, is probably a good idea. So from the standpoint of e-bonding for telecom service order, we think of that as almost a necessary first step. So establishing a relationship, if it's not a smart contract and a blockchain, that infrastructure for blockchain, at least being able to get those services in an automated fashion. So that requires having a product on your side that can e-bond with your 1 to 3 at least top suppliers of telecom for those emerging services, at least for the emerging services, right? So think all moves, adds, changes, disconnects, MACDs, right? Putting them into some type of technology where the ordering can go back and forth from initiating to firm order confirmation. The second, and it's really combined with the next 3 bullets. We see rating and reconcile and rating your embedded base as being a critical component. When you have a handshake and it turns into a blockchain, you're not going to receive a bill, and you're not going to be able to dispute those bills, right? So any changes that you have to make are additional moves, adds, changes, disconnects. So it's really more important to push the validation piece of that to the front when you're actually ordering the service, as opposed to waiting, 30, 60, 90 days until you get the bill and then validating it. So the validation of the order has to happen right off the bat. An important component of that validation piece, and now connecting the validation of the order, the validation of the rate that's associated with the order with the actual order of that service, is creating that embedded base and not just taking it from the bill. So a standard practice, at least that we've seen in the telecom expense management space for over the years, I think it's getting a little bit better though, is it's taking the bill and then starting with that with your inventory. From our perspective, you need to take the bill, but also the order. You need to take the contract. You need to stitch in things from the vendor portal to really create out that rating of the embedded base. Once you do that, you're also creating logic that's associated with it. So enabling you, when those new orders happen, to be able to rate them up front, right? It also helps with things like chargeback, right? So the ability to, right at the order, be able to attach a rate, attaching that rate to maybe one of your different departments from a chargeback standpoint. So you have that third step. Part of the rating that embedded base gives you the logic to be able to rate those orders, which is step number 3, right? Processing the rate and validating upon firm order confirmation, right? So if you do those 3 steps, right, you're ready for a blockchain right away. Once you order it, you're attaching a rate to it. The other portion is you're going to get a rate coming back from that vendor. So you have to not only be able to rate it, but you also have to be able to validate it in near real time, right? So it's an important component. So you have to shift your processes from a billing standpoint up front to the ordering standpoint. And that, regardless of whether you get a bill or not, that's great. You can almost set up an instant accrual for that service. Then transformation of current contract to smart contract. That obviously has to do with negotiating with your vendor, with one of those top 3, 1 to 3 vendors. From my standpoint, you have salespeople who are constantly trying to put complexity in contracts, and so this is almost the opposite of that. It's trying to reduce the complexity in those contracts, right? Pricing options, et cetera. So working your contracts to be more simplistic. Think of contracts. You have the service guide, right? Then you have your MSA, and your MSA refers to the service guide, right? So working those contracts, and you'll have a 3-year contract with AT&T, Verizon, Lumen, right? Start thinking about those contracts with blockchain in mind. They help reduce the complexity, which is an important kind of functional component to hitting to blockchain. And then the other is, from a change order standpoint. So if you've put up front the rating and validating of the rate in the ordering process, there's still going to be mistakes. You're going to make a mistake with the order, and once you've immediately rated it and you've gotten a rate coming back from the vendor and you validated that rate and it's in the blockchain, right? Well, what do you do now? Now you have new services coming, or you look and you say, oh, well, I could have optimized it this way, or that office is turning down. It's really, their function has really changed a little bit. So you have to have a really good process for making changes to those orders. So so if you add a service and you agree to it and it's in a distributed ledger, and then it's, there's some type of settlement that happens, you need to be able to constantly look at that ordering information, that rated order inventory, and you have to be able to optimize it. So you're channeling your energy from getting a bill and validating it, receiving an electronic bill, making sure that you pay it before late payment charges get in the 5 days that you have to be able to do that. So you're taking all that energy into rating it and validating it, but then looking at your entire network, right? And seeing and trying to optimize it, working to optimize it, working to help modernize it. So that's the kind of the 5th and really an important step in transferring those resources and assets into getting you to the emerging piece of technology.
Thanks, Scott. That was terrific. and Deric and Tom as well. So that was great. So as we said at the beginning, we wanted to take you through some practical use cases, and I think we covered that pretty well. But if it's okay with you guys, let me just ask just a couple of follow-up questions from the material that was presented. Deric, I'll start with you. Obviously, there's a lot of variables that dictate an ROI for any given technology project, and no two enterprises or carriers will have the same benefits or cost to implement a telecom DLT solution. Can you provide any insights on what will drive ROI benefits in a telecom DLT solution?
Sure, that's a great question, and I think Scott kind of hit on it with his last slide. It's really all about the journey to shift resources on the enterprise side that are today managing and chasing and making sure of the accuracy of their IT and telecom spend, and focusing those resources on higher value tasks in the organization, coupled with being able to do what Tom alluded to, which is start to retire some of those legacy software assets and applications in your back office that are really meant to chase the complexity over time. And so, as we talked about, this blockchain is really meant to reduce the complexity. And then on the carrier side as well, some of the same benefits are still valid, right? You're reducing complexity in the back office over time because suddenly you have a validated smart contract, smart order, if you will, with your customer. Reduces sort of and obviates any need for discussion after the fact, because that fingerprint's on it, and if it's accepted, there should be no argument about it. And then retiring maybe some of the billing applications in the back office too over time that have been created or augmented or stitched together to support some of these emerging technologies. But I think on the carrier side too, one of the key things is if you have this type of program in place, think about the customer benefit, right? Delighting your customer, making them stickier in that relationship, because suddenly you have a relationship that makes sense, that's easy, and it's more functional over time.
Very good, very insightful. Thank you, Deric. I appreciate it. Hey, Scott, let me ask you. So we went through a couple of different examples here, and obviously spent a little bit of time on the telecom example. It looks pretty practical. It looks to me like there's obviously efficiency gains, there's benefits on both sides, and the like. Now, if you had to guess, how soon do you think the broad capability will be commonplace in telecom? And what should an enterprise be doing in the near term in advance of that future state?
I think probably 3 to 5 years. And
Okay.
so, and they're going to be early adopters. So I think, planning now, you're probably going to see those efficiencies a lot sooner, right? And so it's whether, in that 3 to 5 year spectrum, you could start those conversations right away. It's whether you're going to be the one initiating or the carrier is going to be the one initiating, but most likely at some point, it's going to be initiated by the carrier, right? So it just seems like it's moving down that road. From my standpoint, if you look at that last slide, setting up e-bonding is just critical. Less critical on the invoice side, because we do see that the legacy invoices that are electronic and how they come in as being something that's probably going to be twilighted. Then it's getting really smart on what your inventory is. So if you look at any CIO when they're transforming from POTS lines, and it could be connected to an elevator or mission critical, no CIO wants to disconnect a POTS line that's mission critical to their organization, have their organization come down, right? So it serves multiple, or if you look at it from a cybersecurity standpoint, you're only secure as what you know is on your network. So from cybersecurity to transformation and also to blockchain, I think rating and inventory is just a huge step. It helps all three of those purposes, from modernization, security, and then also being ready for blockchain. And there are some value propositions on that make sense. And then also just having a better understanding on being able to rate that order at the time of happening. It helps with chargeback, right? So it's kind of, I see inventory, setting up the e-bonding. And then if you look at Tom, call Tom, right? Tom understands a lot of the blockchain infrastructure. Get smart on it. I think, would get smart on blockchain would be kind of a third step.
Thank you, Scott. I think that that's actually a great point too. And that's certainly one of the angles that we're coming at with this particular session is that, business leaders need to understand what blockchain can and will do to their processes. So, and the only question is, are you going to put yourself in a position where you're being pushed into something because you haven't prepared yourself? Or are you thinking ahead and you're trying to be a part of these solutions as they're being developed and deployed? You don't want to find yourself behind technically. That's never a good place to be.
Well, and Scott's point about preparing for blockchain, that these steps, the precursor steps aren't necessarily terminating in blockchain. That's where it can go, but they're really helpful preparatory steps. Yep. They have a benefit all to themselves, even if distributed ledger is delayed.
Right. Excellent point. Thank you, Tom. And Tom, as we were preparing for this session, we talked about these two different use cases, and Scott talked about this maybe being 3 to 5 years out in the telecom space, and I think part of that has to do with there's interested parties on both sides. I was wondering, do you want to contrast that with the example that we gave in the healthcare space, and if you had to guess, where that healthcare example might come to fruition, what would be your guess?
I think in the healthcare side, we're going to need to see a disruptive player in the marketplace, either actual healthcare provider disruptive player or electronic health record disruptive player. There's a lot of kind of intrinsic self-interest in keeping data silos. If you're an electronic health record provider, you want to be the electronic health record provider that dominates the market, period. And so openly sharing your data, so far the value equation hasn't worked out. That it's like, oh yeah, let's openly share our data, and make it easier for customers to move to a different solution, for instance. And same thing in the healthcare providers. We've seen tremendous consolidation in the healthcare market. Healthcare systems are getting bigger and bigger, so they want to be the whole world to a patient. They don't want really the patient to wander beyond their entity's boundaries, service area boundaries. So there's really no particular driver right now other than patient rights advocates and things like that. But a big disruptive player could end up changing that. It's a hard market to disrupt. It's a gigantic market, very complex, but a disruptive player could end up bringing that sort of to fruition.
Yeah. Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that. And hopefully that's a good way to sort of tie together if people were trying to understand why we did healthcare and telecom. I think that really summed it up pretty neatly. Telecom is a very clear business value in the relative near term. So there's some expectation that that's going to get traction and happen. And like you said, there's a lot of vested interest. There's a lot of pushing and pulling going on in healthcare. Mm-hmm. So we'll see if a disruptor comes along and we'll see who gets there first, I suppose. Well, Tom, Scott, Deric, I really appreciate your time today. And thanks to all for joining us for this LinkedIn Live discussion. We encourage you to contact any of the folks here at Northridge, at Sage Management, Synchronoss Technologies, if you have further questions or if we can be of any assistance to you. If you'd like to learn more about the extensive services we offer, please visit our websites or follow us on our social media channels in Twitter, Facebook, and of course, LinkedIn. As mentioned earlier, we'll be responding to all the questions and post written responses in the next couple of days, so be sure to check back soon. And we value your feedback. Please feel free to leave a comment on what you enjoyed about today's session or any suggestions for the next time, as we hope to see you back here again at our next event. Have a great day.